The sprawling city of Belgravia glowed under a canopy of golden lights. The high-rises sparkled like watchful sentinels guarding lives filled with secrets, dreams, and heartbreaks. Among those who lived behind polished glass walls was Alexander Grant, a man both admired and pitied. At only 38, Alexander had everything society defined as success. He was a self-made millionaire, owner of one of the country's largest architecture firms, known for designing buildings that kissed the heavens. His life appeared impeccable sleek cars, tailored suits, and a penthouse with a view of the entire city. Yet behind his cold steel blue eyes was a story no fortune could erase. The loss of his beloved wife, Isabella, 3 years ago. Her death had hollowed him. Every corner of their penthouse whispered her laughter. Every creak of the wooden floors echoed her absence. But what pained Alexander most was the quiet sadness of his 6-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily had once been a bright little girl, quick to run into her mother's arms at the end of every school day. Now she clung to her dolls and rarely smiled. Though Alexander tried to fill the void, his work consumed him. He was a provider, yes, but not the warm presence Emily so desperately needed. And so came the decision to hire a nanny. The nanny's arrival, Sophie Bennett, was not what Alexander expected. When she arrived at his office for the interview, she didn't wear the starched uniform of traditional nannies. Instead, she carried herself with a warmth that seemed to melt the very air around her. She wore a simple cream blouse tucked into a soft blue skirt, her chestnut hair tied into a neat bun. Her hazel eyes reflected kindness, the kind that made children feel safe. Alexander, in his usual stern tone, asked the typical questions. "Do you have experience?" "Yes, 5 years with families in London," Sophie replied calmly. "Heartache." She handed him a file. "Can you handle long hours?" "I can handle whatever Emily needs." Her last answer lingered. Alexander noticed she didn't speak of the job in terms of tasks or obligations. She spoke of Emily, as though the child's needs were more important than any clock. Something about her presence unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that poked at the walls he had carefully built. He almost dismissed her, afraid of what her kindness might unravel. But then Emily herself solved the dilemma. The little girl, who rarely spoke to strangers, peeked around Alexander's office door. She looked at Sophie for a long moment, then whispered, "Hi." Sophie knelt down, smiling gently. "Hi, Emily. I love your dress. Did you choose it yourself?" Emily's lips curved into the tiniest smile. Alexander hadn't seen that expression in months. And so, Sophie was hired. Settling in from the first week, Sophie transformed their home. She introduced warmth where silence once reigned. She encouraged Emily to paint, to dance, to giggle at bedtime stories. The penthouse that had felt like a mausoleum to Alexander began to sound like life again. One evening, Alexander returned late from work, briefcase in hand, exhaustion heavy in his posture. He paused outside Emily's room when he heard laughter. "Mr. Bear doesn't like broccoli either." Emily SQUEALED ... double quotes. "Well," Sophie teased in a mock-serious voice, "Mr. Bear doesn't know what he's missing. Broccoli makes you strong." Alexander leaned against the doorframe, listening. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, holding Emily's stuffed bear, pretending it argued with her about vegetables. Emily's laughter rang out, full and free. Something shifted inside Alexander. A crack appeared in his carefully constructed armor, a second glance as weeks turned into months. Alexander began to notice Sophie in ways he hadn't before. Not just as Emily's nanny, but as a woman who carried resilience in her step and gentleness in her smile. She wasn't polished like the women at business galas, nor did she wear designer clothes. Yet she possessed a beauty that was disarming. A beauty born of sincerity. One rainy Friday night, Alexander offered her a ride home. "You don't have to." "Mr. Grant," Sophie protested, clutching her umbrella. "It's pouring," he insisted. "Get in." The ride was quiet at first. Raindrops slid down the tinted windows, and the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "Emily's been doing better," she said softly. "She smiles more now. She talks about you a lot." Alexander's throat tightened. "She does?" "Yes, she says she wants to be an architect, like her daddy." Sophie glanced at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "You mean the world to her, you know." Her words lingered even after he dropped her off. The spark, it wasn't love at first, sight it was slower, like embers catching fire after a long night. Alexander found himself lingering at the dinner table when Sophie joined them. He listened to her laugh, soft yet vibrant, and felt his chest ache with something unfamiliar, longing. He noticed the way she brushed Emily's hair gently, or how she hummed softly while cooking breakfast. But with those feelings came guilt. He still wore his wedding ring. He still dreamt of Isabella's face. How dare he feel something for another woman? One night, as he stood on the balcony with a glass of scotch, he whispered to the empty sky, "Isabella, am I betraying you?" But in his heart, he felt a quiet answer, one he couldn't quite explain. "It's time to live again." Conflict, of course. Not everyone welcomed Sophie's presence at a charity gala. Alexander's business partner, Victoria Lang, approached him. A striking woman with sharp eyes and sharper words. She had long harbored feelings for him. "I hear you've hired a nanny," she said with a tight smile. "Yes, she's been wonderful with Emily." "Wonderful," Victoria repeated, her voice laced with disdain. "Alexander, be careful. People talk. A widower falling for the Nanny, it's a cliché. You don't want to ruin your reputation." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they reflected his own hidden fears. What would people say? Would they think he dishonored Isabella's memory? That night, he grew distant. Sophie noticed. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently when he snapped at Emily for spilling juice. He rubbed his temples. "No, just work." But Sophie saw through the lie. And though she didn't press, her eyes held quiet concern. The turning point, the true shift, came one late evening. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, curled against Sophie's side. Alexander entered the living room, watching the scene unfold. Sophie brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead, her expression tender, almost maternal. Something inside him broke and healed at the same time. "Sophie," he said softly. She looked up, startled. "Yes, Mr. Grant." He hesitated, then spoke the words he had feared. "Thank you for giving Emily her smile back, and for reminding me how to live." Their eyes locked. The air grew heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Sophie's lips parted as if to speak, but she looked away instead. "It's my job," she whispered. "No," Alexander said firmly. "It's more than that." The silence stretched, filled with possibilities neither dared to claim yet. Shadows of the past. Weeks that followed were a tug-of-war inside Alexander's heart. By day, he remained the controlled, dignified millionaire. attending meetings, signing contracts, keeping his mask firmly in place. By night, however, he found himself drawn to Sophie's laughter, her gentleness, her way of filling the home with warmth, yet guilt stalked him like a shadow. He often retreated to his study, staring at Isabella's framed photograph. Her smile was radiant, frozen in time. One night, Sophie brought Emily to bed after a story, then noticed Alexander still in his study. She hesitated at the doorway. "You're working late again," she said softly. He turned, startled. "I couldn't sleep." Her eyes flicked to the photo on the desk. "You miss her?" The statement wasn't a question. Alexander's voice cracked. "Every day." Sophie walked closer, her steps hesitant. "Loving someone new doesn't erase the love you had for her. It just means your heart has more room than you thought." For the first time in years, Alexander let the tears fall, and Sophie, without a word, placed a hand on his shoulder. A growing bond from that night. A subtle shift occurred. Alexander no longer avoided Sophie. Instead, he found reasons to linger, sharing coffee in the mornings, helping Emily with homework together, even taking short weekend trips to the park. To outsiders, they looked like a family. Emily, in her innocent wisdom, noticed too. One afternoon, while Sophie braided her hair, Emily asked, "Do you like Daddy?" Sophie nearly dropped the comb. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emily grinned. Like him. Because Daddy smiles more when you're around. And I like it when he smiles." Sophie's heart skipped. She kissed Emily's head, unsure how to answer. Children saw truths adults tried to hide. Temptation, the breaking point, came during Emily's school play, dressed as a sunflower. Emily delivered her lines shyly but proudly. Sophie clapped the loudest, while Alexander, seated beside her, felt his chest swell with pride. Afterward, they walked Emily to the car. Rain poured suddenly, drenching the schoolyard. Without thinking, Alexander shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around Sophie's shoulders. She froze at the gesture. Their eyes locked. Raindrops glistened on her lashes. The world seemed to blur, leaving only them, Alexander. She whispered, using his first name for the first time. Before he could answer, Emily skipped back, tugging their hands together. "Hold hands so we don't get lost." She giggled, and so, under the storm, their fingers intertwined. Neither pulled away. Doubt and distance, but joy was quickly replaced by doubt. Alexander pulled back emotionally, retreating behind his walls again. He feared scandal, judgment, even betrayal of Isabella's memory.